Excellent. Okay. So hopefully you can see the construction estimator. Yay or nay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I thought we would look at some of the pricing data out of this thing to give you an idea of some of the options and the things you have to watch out for and why the specifications are important. I will make copies of some of these pages and email them out to you. I'll turn them into PDFs and send them to you so we can take a look. As you remember, estimating is an art. So it's not an exact science. And according to the, at least this, says that there are legitimate disagreements. And that's why often you'll see big differences in the bids or the estimates that people put together for various jobs. Now this book is arranged, the residential is arranged alphabetically. So the first half of the book is residential, last half of the book is commercial, and the commercial part of the book is arranged by maybe CSI. So, and that makes it a little tougher because what I think, you know, what do you call drywall? Is it drywall? Is it gypsum board? Is it something? Yeah, something else. But they start off with the adhesives. We don't have any adhesives. I wanted to look at, I think, cabinets a little bit since we haven't talked too much about cabinets. And so when you go through here, are you using any database? So you don't have to hunt too hard. You'll notice that under kitchen cabinets, they also say C vanities. So that would be the bathroom cabinets are a little bit different. And then some things it's hard to tell if they're fall under cabinetry or if they fall under furniture, but you do need to look at some of the limitations that they have for these things. And so they're talking about good quality mill-made modular units with solid hardwood face frames, hardwood door frames, drawer fronts. Again, if you really want to get a good cost, you're going to look at the specifications or talk to some cabinet makers if they're being made custom and find out exactly what they're going to do. And one thing that often gets overlooked is for cabinets, countertops are separate. You pay separate for the countertops and the drawer pulls, which are expensive. In many cases, you also typically buy those as separate pieces and they have to be installed. So as I said, I will make some PDFs and send this out so you have some of this for reference. For San Diego, we would have some adjustments. Those adjustments would be higher than what they're showing here. You do have to be careful because you can see for the cabinets, for example, that if we start looking at some of these kitchen cabinets, up here at the top, they're talking about the material and the labor and the particular unit. And so when we look at the each on some of these things, you know, for many things that are installed, carpentry being one of them, a lot of times the material and the labor are pretty close together. But you can see for cabinets that we're paying quite a bit more for the actual cabinet than we are paying for the individual installation, and that's something to kind of keep an eye on. However, if you're trying to put them in a kitchen that's not square and they're having to make a bunch of adjustments, or you want some custom height or something else, you need to look at this stuff. So again, on these pricing, we have, our craft code, and we could go back and take a look at that craft code and see what they're talking about. So let me see if I can find the darn thing. And so they're looking at, oops. BC, which they're showing there, that's one carpenter. And so if you figure you're going to have a helper along with that, you have to make sure you've included that particular charge in there. And again, we've got some general stuff. So, whoops. So if we look at the rules of thumb here, we've got uppers and lowers. Lowers usually 24 inches deep. If you have a custom though, you need to pay attention to that. The uppers are the wall cabinets. Those are normally only 12 inches deep. Again, that's something you need to look at. The height, if you've got a high ceiling, and I think our kitchen, we've furred that down to 8 feet. So that's a little bit different. We do have some pictures of a couple of cabinets. We've got a pantry in there. So we probably need to look at that a little differently. Bathrooms, I'm not sure what we have. So here, for example, over in the left, this is our refrigerator. We do have some, it looks like some uppers. Oops. Over that, we've got a pantry. This pantry is more than 12 inches deep, certainly, but that goes all the way up, at least according to one of the elevations. We have our island here, and it looks like we're building this basically as a cabinet and dropping some sort of cooktop or range in there. I'm not quite sure. I have to look a little harder at our specs. We've got our lowers here, and on both sides of the window, we've got some uppers. We may have some cabinet elevations. I believe we do, and we can take a look at those. Our bathroom, I'm not sure what we've got. We have to take a look. That could be a vanity or a cabinet underneath. Some of these are freestanding or pedestals. The countertops, usually we either get a separate countertop and drop the sink in it or mount it beneath it, depending on what type of sink we have. And then they also have the Corian sinks that are integral with the countertop, so it all comes out as a single piece. So those are little things to look at upstairs. Now we have our bath 2 and our bath 1 upstairs. There's also a linen cabinet. And so this right here, whoops. Whether that's going to be included in the cabinetry or whether we're going to treat that a little bit differently, we'd have to decide. Again, we could put in a cheap one or we can put in something that's fancy schmancy. We'll look at the closets later, but when we start looking at the doors. So, but this is where things often get out of hand and where you need to be pretty specific on what you're quoting a price for so you don't get bitten later. The owner's been watching the Do It To Yourself network and is looking at some, $5,000 sink vanity, and you think you're going to go in and put one in for $300 or $400, and it's not clear in the contract what you're providing. So there's room for a big discrepancy in expectations, which causes lots of problems. So we do have, on the cross sections, we show some stuff. So here's our kitchen. Here's our island. We have our counter. We got a toe space on this side. We're not showing a toe space on that side. The reason is this top sticks over far enough that you're probably not going to be don't have to worry about stubbing your toes on the edge of the counter. So you can stand a little closer, like I say, on this side because you need to. So you do need a toe space there, but on the other side, you're probably not going to have a toe space. So again, that's something you're going to try and get sorted out. This is the pantry over here on the, whoops. So here's our pantry. We've got cabinets above. Here's our refrigerator. We've got some cabinets above. From this one, get rid of that thing. If you go back and look at the floor plan, this cabinet here is shallower than this one here. Now, I don't know if that's intentional or not, or at least that's what it seems to be. Right, so this looks like the line of the upper cabinet here. And our pantry comes all the way out, and it looks like that's going to be full height all the way up. Something that you need to talk to people about is a lot of times, depending on how tall the people that live there are, they may just want this blocked off. So when you start looking at things, because a lot of people find it difficult to use those high cabinets, but again, that's something to look at. So countertops are separate. We do have some information, like I said, when we start looking at the doors, we'll need to take a look because some of these units appear to be louvered. And I hate louvered doors because, particularly if they need to be painted, they're a pain in the you-know-what to paint. I think we've got some schedules for some of this interior stuff. I guess I can look at the front.
I don't think there are any schedules for the first building, only for the second one.
Okay, only for the second building. Yeah, I knew there was some for the second. So again, you're kind of left in the dark. You're not quite sure what they want. There's so many different styles of cabinets and so many different price grades that you're probably going to have to specify something. Normally, I would give them a picture of what I'm proposing to give them unless they get more specific with me. Sometimes these are handled on an allowance, so much per cabinets, uppers and lowers. But that's just an area where there are lots of problems. So, and if we go back to our little picture here, you can see under that rules of thumb, first of all, up here in the dark, so that's being kind of highlighted. It says kitchen cabinet costs vary widely. Prices listed in this section are for standard grade residential cabinets, whatever that is. Add 65% to material costs for premium grade cabinets with hardwood fronts and frames, mitered corners, solid wood drawer bodies. Most of the time, the drawer bodies are made out of particle board or something similar, with steel guides and ball bearings. So if you want more expensive, a lot of people like those soft close or are expecting those. Those cost more money. So it's deduct 45% from material costs for economy grade cabinets, laminated plastic on particle board. So again, we can spend, there's a minimum amount we can spend, but there probably is no maximum, depending on how you want to go. Now they do have, for rules of thumb, we can look, 34.5 inches high, which is standard. But sometimes if you have a client, particularly if they're tall, they may want a taller cabinet. So I've been in a couple places where, they had cabinets that were 36 to 42 inches tall because the owner was tall and didn't like bending over to work on the counter. So that would add to the cost. These are prices per lineal foot. So base cabinet, they're showing about roughly about $200 per lineal foot. Wall cabinets, which are the high ones, 30 inches high, 12 inches deep. Again, we're at about 100. So if you've got both, just as a rule of thumb, you're looking at about $300 per lineal foot for cabinets. And that's why a lot of people start crying. Because if you got a big kitchen and a lot of cabinets, I was talking to somebody not too long ago. They spent $100,000 on the kitchen cabinets, but they had warming drawers for the muffins and all kinds of other things that were built in. So you can get really fancy. That little inside corner unit, they've got some real tricky ones. And those can get pretty expensive too. And then down here, they've broken it up into, actual one-door base cabinets. I mean, they just have one door on the bottom. You also have to figure out which way you want them to open or hinge, how you want those. Sometimes the owner has a preference on whether they open right hand or left hand. Depending on theirs. So we have a sink base cabinet here. So this is one you're going to be throwing the top on with a sink underneath. It makes a difference whether you've got the, one drawer or two drawer, not a huge difference, but again, depending on the width, what the client wants. Those farmhouse sinks are pretty popular these days, those oversized sinks. And so they have some cost implications too that you need to take a look at. If you're just trying to get something down and dirty, you're probably just going to go with, the rule of thumb type of thing and then try and adjust up or down based on the quality they want. But, on each drawer pull, I can spend $2 or $3, or I can spend $200 or $300 if I want to go to, Albuquerque or Taos or one of those places where they beat the drawer pulls out by hand, and you have a blacksmith make them. So they can be pretty expensive. We've got the, all these different things. Whether or not you want adjustable shelves in those things, above appliance wall cabinets, we've got some prices on those too. And so you can take a look at what people are actually asking for. And you can see here something, utility cabinet, 66 inches high, 12 inches deep. So that's 5'6". I'd have to go back and look at our plan again. Because how tall are our cabinets?
$36.
And so these do not appear to be 66 inch. Oops. So when I scale these, I am not seeing 66 inches. I am seeing about 72 inches. So I would assume that's a little more expensive. And then the uppers look like they're 2 feet rather than 30 inches. So I would, that's something I'd want to look into to see if there's anything significant with the price on that.
What's the standard fridge height? That's
Standard
probably
fridge
what's
height?
determining it.
It depends because they vary too. Both the height, the width, and the depth. The depth and the height vary more than anything else because I had a little problem with mine. I ordered one. Turned out it stuck out about 3 inches farther than I was anticipating, and it sits on a platform, so I had to get a bigger, make the platform a little bit bigger for it. So I think 68 is a common height or something close to it for the refrigerators.
That was 72 for some reason.
Well, we can look at appliances. I would think that, let me see if they have them here.
On my standard,
So I think we started off with adhesives. Let's look at appliances.
yeah, 67 inches to 70 inches.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you get into problems because people want all their appliances to be the same height, and sometimes that's hard to do unless you spend a bunch of money to get them all exactly the same height. So I think my freezer, for example, is about an inch shorter than my refrigerator, and they sit side by side, and that bothers some people. Does not bother me, but you can go on the Home Depot website and take a look at that, or Lowe's or Sears or whoever else you want to get your appliances for. And then we have other things that we need to look at, like I think down here at the bottom, if you want special things, you want a glass holder, where you hang your wine glasses by the little tracks built into the cabinets. So you can get things like that if you need to put an oven in there and you don't want to have to modify it typically, but all of these appear to be 66 inches high. And that might be what you quote to people with the 30 inch above there. So 66 plus 30 gives you what?
96.
96. So that's your 8 foot. So That's 30. And then 31, we've got lots of stuff. So you got microwave cabinets.
Oh,
You've
yeah.
got the additional labor costs for cabinets. And so here's our tall utility pantry or oven cabinets. So, they've got it listed here. Tall wall cabinet to counter level. Hood cabinet over the range with the vent cut out. Which we don't have. We're going to have a hood out over the island somewhere. So we probably won't have a cabinet, but we have to be careful because some of those hood vents that hang from the ceiling get a little expensive. Refrigerator end panel. So if you have an end area, for example, where you don't want to see the refrigerator and you want to have a wood panel in there, those are little things that wind up costing more money too. So these are all, and then when you fit them in, right, usually you don't just shove the panel in there, you have some trim up at the ceiling. You got some little trim pieces that you have to put in. And so those are,
right?
yeah, well, some sort of molding.
Some type of.
Yeah, if they want deluxe, then you go with a deluxe trim or some crown molding. Otherwise, you're going to put in something, a little 3/4 inch wide strip that's easy to bend that just closes that gap between the ceiling and the top of the cabinet so you don't have an uneven line. Go. Let's try it out. So these are all little.
Quick question, Larry. I don't know if you know, what's the average height for the base cabinet, the space between the base cabinet and the wall cabinet?
Oh.
Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I do. I know if you have a microwave or over a stove, I think it's 24 inches minimum that you have to have.
Oh, okay.
So a little bit depends on the clients too, but usually, particularly if you're going to put under cabinet lights in there, that's another extra you have to count on because usually they have to build a little skirt to hide the lighting. And the light goes up in there unless you want to do a battery operated retrofit, which most people don't want to do. But you can do that. So somewhere, where is it? Somewhere I've got a book just on millwork. And there are standards for millwork. Where is that thing? Well, I'll bring that next time. And then you can really get into it
for this portion,
because that's just the standards for the millwork. But and then there's, like I said, there's a whole list of things, but I will make some copies of some of these pages. These are the things that are helpful, though, when you're trying to put an estimate together, to take a bit of a look at it to help you figure out about what your cost should be. Or you send this to your subcontractor if you're going to subcontract this out, but you still want to use something like this as kind of a checklist to make sure you've asked them to do all of these things, because otherwise they come back as either extras that you're going to have to pay for or try and get the owner to pay for, or you're going to have to do it. But preliminarily, you can just use a cost per linear foot for uppers and lowers. So, and again, the hardware typically separate. I don't know where they have those. Let me see the And then we haven't paid for anything yet. So we've got countertops.
Oh yeah.
And again, we can spend a little, not too terribly much. Again, we have a particular crew. We have a price. You see, most of this is lineal foot. Additional costs for laminated countertops. And so all of these things are little extras. So if you want a half round corner or you want some special detail, those all cost you some money. Granite countertops are also listed here, and you may be able to find a deal with some of this stuff, but what sneaks up on a lot of people is the edge, the bullnose edge, because we're paying for the counter. And again, I don't know, any of you go to the rock yards or the granite shops, look at the slabs. They have about 5 different price levels for granite. And so there's certain colors and textures that are pretty standard that don't cost you a lot of money. And then there are other colors or textures that will really drive the cost up. So, and usually you have to buy a slab. So the slabs have a minimum size. And even if you're not going to use every bit of it, once they start chopping up a slab, you're pretty much buying all of the slab. You can ask for the scraps left over, but that's something else that often gets in. You'll notice that the edges can get pretty expensive too. So let me pull this down a bit. So this is granite. And if we want a bullnose edge, for example, right, here's our bullnose edge. We got another $25 or so, roughly, per lineal foot just for that bullnose edge. So, 8 feet of cabinet, you've spent another $200. And so those are the little things that will typically sneak up on people. And that's why many people, once they start getting to the finish, you'll notice that they start looking at different options or having to go cheaper because they didn't have it in their budget, and the full cost starts to become apparent to them. So, you see delivery is another one, that eased edges, electrical outlet cutout, that's $40. Faucet holes, so you need some, and again, you want to make sure that you've coordinated your faucet holes. You've got the holes for the right faucet, and then if you change your faucet, it may turn out that the holes change, because we normally have 4-inch and 8-inch, but some of the custom faucets can also sneak up on you because they've got slightly different dimensional issues. Undermount sink, engineered stone. So there's the quartz, which is very popular. I'm not a big fan of granite because when I drop something on it, it usually breaks. The granite's pretty hard. Corian or something like that's a little more forgiving. Also with granite, you're supposed to go in and do some maintenance on that. Reseal it about every 6 months, which seems like a lot of work to me after I've spent a bunch of money on something. And again, we've got a whole bunch of little options. on these things. And they're talking about the vanity tops, so that would be for the bathroom. And again, if there's something specified, I'd like to know what that is and actually find out both what the availability is and what the cost is. You know, the labor's not going to change a huge amount, but the material costs can change quite a bit. So, and you can see that for a 4-foot long top, right? This is Corian with an integral sink, but yeah, that's a pretty expensive little item to me. You know, I figure it's going to be $300 or $400 for a little vanity in there, and what I really wind up spending is about $1,000 by the time I put the faucets in and put a little trim on it and take care of everything. So that's some of that stuff. We'll come back to the doors in a minute. So we've been talking a little bit about gypsum drywall and accessories. So they start out with a brief description here. Labor costs, good quality hanging, taping with smooth sanded joints, level 4, and I forget if there are 5, I think, different levels of finish for drywall. So you have to take a look. I've got some texturing costs that are included, taping. They give you just about what you should be using. 1/4 inch. So if you've got curved walls, that's usually where they'll use a couple layers of 1/4 inch to build it up to a 1/2 inch, but you can't bend a 1/2 inch on a very tight radius at all. So they do make some 1/4 inch stuff. So you got to put in a couple layers. So you'd have some additional labor for something like that. 3/8 I don't see too much of used. 1/2 inch for residential is pretty typical, although some people may want 5/8. That can cause some havoc with your wall widths when you go to put in your door frames. If you're commercial versus residential, or you may need jamb extensions. Type X is fire rated. Type C is more expensive than Type X, but you can usually substitute 1/2 inch Type C for 5/8 Type X. If there's a thickness issue, or if you're fighting for that little bit of space, you may want to go with the Type C. Type X has fiberglass fibers in there. Type C has little bits of perlite or vermiculite in there, and so when they get hot, they expand, they compensate for the shrinkage in the drywall when the water gets drained off. So again, we've got different accessories. We've got our installation cost. Anybody see the price of oil lately? I saw a price on oil of $5 a barrel. So the price of oil has basically collapsed. So anyway, so drywall installation, again, we have a particular type of crew, D1, productivity. So these are all based on square foot. Material, labor. Here you see that unlike cabinets where most of the money is in the material and not a lot was in the labor, for drywall, the labor charge is actually relatively significantly higher than the material cost. So a half inch for most residential. If you want green board, that would be something you might put in the bathrooms, although there are much better products than green board out there. So I would not recommend it for interior use because it falls apart almost as quickly as regular drywall. Den shields are one of the other products I think is a better choice for that. 5/8 type X. So whatever you're using for ceiling installation, right? They're adding a third to the price. So that's something you should know if you're putting that up. So you may decide to put it up and then you may bring in somebody to tape it. So they have deduct for no taping or joint finishing. But you will notice that the units on that are CSF. So what's CSF? It's 100 square feet. So if you see M, that's 1,000. If you see C, that's 100. And so they have some deducts in there. These are our different levels of finishing, and I'd have to go into the standards and look at those. That's something you might have in the specifications, though. You know, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so you see down there at level 5, you're finishing wall joints and you're skimming the entire surface with some joint compound.
That's the most expensive one.
Right. So you're spending more money as the level goes up. As the level numbers get larger, you're going to spend more money for that.
There's no skip trail or anything else, huh? It's just regular.
No. And again, for San Diego, we would have some adjustments in there.
Yeah.
So that's 168. And then we've got more stuff.
Was quick question, Larry? Was this is strategizing included in the framing, or is it part of the drywall?
What was that again?
Straight edge for the drywall. Straight edge the walls. Is that included with the framing, or the drywall has to do that?
No, usually that's a drywaller, although the drywaller is going to come in, and that's something that may need to be coordinated if you have a flatness or a deviation. You know, commercial, they're usually using steel studs, so it's not much of a problem.
Yeah.
But on the wood, that could be a problem. So what would happen typically is if you're a drywall person, you're going to come in and check the framing. And then if the framing is lumpy and bumpy,
Right.
you know your drywall is going to be a little lumpy and bumpy, then you may tell them that you can't meet the requirements, not because you can't do it, but because the framing before you start is already out of spec with regards to flatness. And again, that gets back to the owner. Whose fault is that? Well, you know, that may go back to the framer, but lots of times the framers aren't given the information on what the drywaller is supposed to do.
Yeah.
So that's something that often falls through the cracks on coordination, but it needs to be done.
Yeah, because yeah.
So we've got drywall textures, and again, there are different types of textures. You know, the reason you hear that knockdown, spray applied and trowel, is because that appears to be cheap, right? We're looking at $757 per 100 square feet. But if you look at skim coat smooth, which was that higher level of finish that we were looking at, now we're adding a significant amount of money. And again, acoustic sealing, the popcorn stuff. Um, we've got some issues with that. Repairing drywall, there's some prices on that. Typically, you got a couple of repairs to make. Joint compound, joint tapes, drywall screws. So if you're getting down to that detail, typically we're just getting a subcontract for something like that. But if we're going to do it ourselves, then you have to break it down to all the materials that need to be done. And that's why we keep harping on, what are you going to do with that? What's the purpose of that estimate? Why are you making it? What information do you really need? Everybody know what a hat channel is? That's a little metal channel shaped like a hat. So sometimes we're putting the drywall on that. Soundproofing, these are little resilient channels. And they typically look like a hat channel a bit, but you only fasten one side of it. And it acts like a little shock absorber, so it helps attenuate the sound. It deadens out the vibration, but these are all, you're paying by the lineal foot for those things, and usually they go on either 16 or 24 inches on center. So here's these resilient channels. And those you're paying by the lineal foot. So if you're putting those at 16 or 24 inches on center, you're going to wind up with a lot of lineal footage for something like that. Drywall arch, bull nose.
Those are fun.
So we've got all these little attachments. And again, there are other things out there too, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what some of these things are. Doors, which we haven't looked at. And so in addition to the door, we've got hardware. So I had a guy call me up once, and house I'd done some engineering on, they wanted to take the steel out of the footing because their concrete guy told them if they left the steel out, they could save $300. I asked them how much the entry door was, and they said, oh, it's about $10,000. So how about the hardware for the door? That's about $2,500. I said, well, you may save that $300, but your door may not open if the foundation cracks a little bit in that area. Said you'd be much better off putting in a cheaper door, cheaper hardware. Makes a lot more sense to me, but you never know with folks. But the doors, again, all the finished materials, there's some minimum amount you're going to have to spend for it, and then there's a maximum amount. So exterior slab doors, typically 1 3/4 inches thick. So I had to replace one of my doors the other day, and I noticed I had a problem. It was 1 3/8 inches thick. Somebody had put an interior door for the exterior door. And what that screws up is when you go back in, if you want to put a real exterior door, then you got to move the hole or make it bigger for the latch and the lock and everything else. So it can be a bit of a pain. So these are kind of cheap things here. Again, you can look at the craft code. So what else they got there? Yeah, they just tell you it's going to go quicker when the carpenter is using a router, a door jig, and a pneumatic nailer. And if you want to see what any of those look like, let me know. I've got one around here or two around here somewhere. Plus some other little things. These are standard sizes. Entry doors typically 3 feet. Building code says to comply with the code, they shouldn't be more than 4 feet wide unless you have a complying door nearby. If you want those Jurassic Park doors, you know, those 8 feet wide and 20 feet tall entry doors, those don't meet code. They're pretty impressive looking, but they're really, really expensive. So we have a whole bunch of things. These are just cheap slab doors. So that just means it's just a flat slab. Doesn't have any particular definition to them. Other little things you can get. And again, if it's a specific door that's been called out or the owner, then, you know, I'm going to call up and get a quote on that particular door. Now, also the delivery or the lead time, you have to be careful with, any of you familiar with TM Cobb? Heard of TM Cobb? Anyway, they sell a lot of doors here in San Diego, but there's an industry standard for what constitutes a right-hand swing or a left-hand swing. But you better be very careful with TM Cobb because they do it exactly the opposite of what all the rest of the industry does. And if you're not careful, you'll go to them and tell them you want a door that opens, you know, left-handed. And one of them, they look at the door from the outside, and the other one, they look at the door from the inside. So again, if I'm actually ordering one, I usually have to draw little pictures and tell them where the outside and where the inside is and which way I want the door to swing. So most entry doors swing in to the building. Every once in a while, you get somebody that wants a door that swings out. And sometimes that's on, you know, a French door or something because they want the space. They don't want to intrude on the space on the interior. So here's some hardwood panel entry doors. And we can spend a little or we can spend a lot. Beveled door, glass entry doors. Carved hardwood double doors. Now we're starting to talk a little more money. So we got a set. I got $2,500, but you can spend as much as you want on a set of entry doors. So we have some trim, stop molding. So again, there's a whole bunch of different little things that you have to account for. And that T astragal that they're talking about at the bottom, that's a little piece that fits on the double doors in the middle so that you close the gap. Fire rated doors. And you better look at your specs. 24 gauge is pretty thin. So if they've specified something heavier, you need to take a look at that. Notice that long warranty for that house that's going to last 50 to 100 years. They give you a 10-year warranty on that. So when you see something like primed, where did I say? Oh yeah, right here. Then the door's got to be painted. And sometimes that's important to know, because if they go ahead and set the door trim, they set it too tight to the edge of the door. After you get it painted, it may not shut quite right, or you may have paint pulling off on your door trim. We check the time. Oh yeah, we're good. So I look at pre-hung doors. So less labor, a little harder to screw up. Although you can screw up anything if you work at it. You know, here they're talking about flush hardwood. 2 1/8 inch bore for the lock set with a 2 3/8 inch back set. So I've got the door I've got to go and put some work on that has a custom. It's a bigger, takes a longer lock set. It's set back farther from the edge of the door. So I had to spend a little extra money for that. Alders is the type of wood. But you can see we get down here. This is only 2.5 feet wide, 30 by 80, couple of 14-inch side lights. And even without making adjustments or taxes or anything else, you know, we got $3,000. So we can spend quite a bit on the doors. And something else you need to watch for is in these houses with 9-foot ceilings, often they like to come in with a 7-foot door. And maybe set all the windows at 7 feet too for the header height, so that they get a nice line around the house, or the door doesn't look quite as small sitting in the wall. But we have lots and lots of options on doors, and I have a bunch of catalogs somewhere. Last exterior door I bought, just the door, I think was $592. But if I wanted it primed, painted, and drilled for the lock set, it was $1,000. Now we haven't talked about their hardware yet either. Now these are metal doors. Low E, when we get into the windows, this is something that you'll sometimes see specified on glazing, that low E makes it more thermally efficient. It's a coating they put on the glass. And then you may have true divided lights, or which tend to be more expensive. So if you look at this door here, these could be individual panes, or often what you have is you'll just have a grill that snaps in and makes it look like they're divided lights. So usually the one piece is, with the grill is cheaper than having individual glass lights in there. Jams you have to coordinate with your wall thickness. So you will see that most of these are saying, what do we have here somewhere I saw? Oh yeah, 4 and 9/16 inch jam. And so 3.5 inches plus a 1/2 inch drywall on both sides is 4.5 inches. You got a little bit of skim coat, a little bit of texture on the wall. That gets you up to that 4 and 9/16. But if you have 5.5 inch thick walls, you're using 2x6 walls, which we are in some places in this house, you're going to have to get bigger jams. And so there's more money involved with the wider jams, or you have to use jam extensions, or you can get adjustable jams, but they cost more money too.
Manuel, can you mute your line? I'm getting some radio through here.
I muted
you.
it. So, okay. These are all decorative pre-hung entry doors. We haven't talked about screen or security grills. You may want fiberglass, but there's a ton of different door options out there. So normally I like to go through the list. Again, sometimes they're specific and you have the information you need to make a good guess. Other times you just say, these are what I'm proposing to provide. If the owner signs off on it, then that's what you hopefully will provide. Doors and screen doors. And so again, you'll notice those screen doors. Do you see any hardware on them? So normally that's extra. Not always, but typically that's extra. We don't have storm doors here in San Diego for the most part, but some places you do use them. So they may have storm doors and storm windows. Security storm doors. Interior slab doors. And you have to be real careful if you're retrofitting doors in an existing house, particularly if it's an old house like mine. I was working on a door the other day, and the opening is neither square nor flat. And it was kind of a pain trying to get the door to fit inside. So this is just showing the construction. So there's usually you got some solid wood around the perimeter. Interior that's cardboard honeycomb. And then you just have a face over the top on both sides. Might be particle board, might be masonite, could be plywood, could put in a solid door too, but it's going to be quite a bit more money if you want a solid door. The interior door is normally 1 3/8 inches as opposed to 1 3/4 for the exterior doors. All options for interior. Yeah, we're getting into those half louvers or stuff, so you can see the door prices are getting a little more. And again, we can spend as much as we want on doors. And somewhere we got an error in here, so that's something else we should take a look at. If you look at the doors here, we got a price for the material here. We've got some labor, and that total is wrong. So with any kind of database, you have to be a little bit careful because I don't know what happened there. Probably this is set up on a spreadsheet and maybe the cell isn't working quite right. Has a wrong formula in there, but maybe I'll call them up and ask them what that's all about. So let me flag that and I'll call Craftsman and ask him about that. All the other ones appear to be right. So if we look at this batch here, those are correct. But this batch up here, something is definitely out of whack.
So is there a rule of thumb for like an interior door, like how much it generally costs?
Well, if they're cheap hollow core doors, slab doors, yes. If otherwise, all bets are off.
Okay, what about the cheap one?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's normally what you're specifying, but you know, these days people want those barn doors. They want something that looks like a farm door or a wood door. Or they want mahogany, or they want oak, or they want pine. They want that rustic Southwest look. That's where the prices really start going off the, literally off the hinges. So, you know, with the interiors, you have to be pretty darn careful. You know, for the framing, you got to have a certain amount of structure to hang everything on. But once you get to the point where you're hanging on there, I mean, I can spend $10,000 on doors easy. I don't know if you've looked at those nano walls. Banana wall, you know, they're about $1,000 a linear foot. And that seems like a lot to me. And I think the bigger ones are probably more than $1,000 a lineal foot, but 12-foot door, $12,000. I'd have to take a look. You know, these are all different ones, and you see we've got hemlock, or we've got knotty alder, or we've got, again, depending on what the people have looked at. French doors, patio doors. And here they're actually calling out Anderson. Right there. So I know that's a door manufacturer. But there are other folks that make doors. And you see some of these things are starting to get a little expensive. You know, now we're up to $2,000 for that 6068. That's not a particularly large door, but dual pane, low E, anodized aluminum track, stainless steel cap, hardware, and we can spend easily two times that much, three times that much if we want to go with some fancier designer type sliding glass door. Accordion type doors. So those are the ones that are look like a pleated door almost, pet door. Closet doors. So most of those are reasonably cheap, but you may want something more expensive, or the client may. Mirrored. Well, this is why we would normally like to have a schedule. Otherwise, we have to do a lot of work and a lot of research to try and figure out what they really want. I think we have some that, are louvered. Drapes. So I don't know, are we providing drapes in this one? They're not listed, so I probably just put, not included in contract. Let the owner pick those out. And if you look at the price per lineal foot, so there's a height that we need to watch out for.
Mhm.
And we haven't talked at all about hardware. And so they give you some references to some other places you can look for some of this stuff. But low to medium cost house, 1,600 square foot. They have a lump sum price where they're using for the cheap stuff, $1,800. And if you want it better, $2,200. But again, this doesn't include tax or local adjustments. Now we can get into the specific. And you want to look at the specs. If you don't have specs, then you're just going to come up with some standard. You need to make sure that what is offered is in the finish that they want. So, there's some standard ones. And then if you start going into these antique, or any of you go to San Diego Hardware ever?
Yep.
So if you go up there, make sure you've taken your heart medication when you start looking at some of the prices on that hardware. But this is all relatively inexpensive stuff. Door knockers, kick plates, door stops. So those often get forgotten. And they're not a big deal, right? If you order them along with everything else, they're pretty cheap. But if you have to make a special trip to the hardware shop or send somebody to the hardware shop to pick those things up, you're going to be paying a lot more for these things. But and things like street numbers, they often get overlooked. So usually in order to get your final, the building code says you have to have a street address prominently displayed on the house. So those are little things that often get forgotten about. And you see where they say house street numbers, that's per number. Hinges, and you can spend as much as you want. I talked to a guy, all he had done was specify hinges for 35 years. So he knew everything there was about hinges. And there's a lot of different types of hinges and self-closing and ball bearing versus just the ones that rub on the metal. And you can spend a small fortune on high quality hinges, but most of the time we're just buying cheap hinges. So 3.5 or 4 inches are pretty typical. Exterior exit door, a heavy one, typically needs 3 or 4 hinges. The interior doors typically have 3 hinges, but some of them only have 2. Doorknob, you can either buy the cheap ones or you can, again, if you want to spend $1,000 on a doorknob, it's not that hard to do.
Spending the money is not that hard. Making it.
Yeah. Let's see if they've got the pulls in here. Mailbox. Oh, this is right. We've got that little island with the stove over it.
Que nosotros que somos o fuimos como ellos también, que somos personas normales.
So here you see one of the little cheap new tone range hoods. And so this one, you say, okay, yeah, that's fine. But then you look at something like this, which is what you would typically put over one of those countertops.
One of the islands.
And so ceiling hun range hood, this is a particular type, 3-speed, that all looks typical. 40 inches wide, which isn't particularly wide. It's supposed to extend usually beyond the edges of the stove or the cooktop. So they make 48-inch ones, they make 60-inch ones, but look at the price on this thing. So again, labor is a small consideration on this particular one. But there's $3,500. when you don't know or haven't made up your mind. So again, on something like that, I would be pretty specific, because you can spend a lot more. You can also spend less on those custom range hoods. All right, look at built-in ranges, and I don't know if we have a, you know, how much you want to spend on some of these things, but you start looking at prices on these things. Again, if you get the opportunity, you can go up to a place like Ferguson up in Kearney Mesa, and they have a kitchen and bath showroom up there, and just take a look at some of this stuff to give you a little bit of a feel for prices. But you can spend as much as you want. We'll be talking a little bit about roofing. And so you can look at the cheap asphalt shingles there. 145 bucks a square. Those are Class A. You can look at those heavier composition shingles. Is there a price difference between the first two? Yeah, I mean, more than doubles. We don't care about that. Let me see. I want to find the copper roofing.
Oh,
You can look at slate, real slate. So how's this for a price per square? So versus that 145 bucks for some inexpensive comp. Where's my clay though? Or my
there
copper?
it is. Roofing tile, okay.
Yeah, I don't see it in here. I'll have to go back and find it. It's probably in the commercial side. So anyway, I think that's probably enough. I just wanted to go through some of these to give you an idea. As I said, I'll put together a package of some of this stuff and send you to take a look. But that's why there's so many problems with residential estimates in particular, is because usually the specifications are very, very sketchy. And there's a huge area for disagreement between the owner and the contractor unless you say, this is what I'm going to give you, and this is what's included in that, and this is what's excluded from that. Otherwise, you may wind up with a little bit of trouble. You have to remember that the contractor's license board is set up to protect consumers, not to protect contractors. And so when there's a dispute, it usually goes against the contractor. So any questions on any of that stuff?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Boy, that's an ugly hand.
It's okay.
Yeah. So anyway,
Nice
I
ring.
will. Yeah. No, thank you. I will get this out hopefully tomorrow. I'm going to stop recording